Parasites thrive on the lives of others, and even within the world of Pokemon, they are inescapable Pokemon that live inside or on each other as they drain their prey of nutrients. From the adorable little Joltik, who absorbs electricity from Pokemon like Yamper, to terrifying power of Nihilego, who pours toxins into their hosts while absorbing what they desire. And of course, we have the classic mushrooms that take over the bodies of Paras from the moment they are born. All these parasites and more will be explored today as I bring to you the many terrifying parasites of Pokemon. Out there, I'm Cruelest, and let's dig into our parasites, or I guess let's let them dig into us. Don't do that. Please don't do that. Cruelest VA is not held legally liable for anyone who ingests tapeworm pills. But before we ever actually begin, what exactly are parasites? Simply put, parasites are effectively creatures that live on or inside of other creatures as they take nutrients or some other resource from their host against their will. A parasite in our world includes things like tapeworms, though there are other creatures that are able to live inside each other and be symbiotic in nature. Hey, can I have more food? I'm eating for two. You're pregnant? No, I have a tapeworm. These would be creatures such as the scaly-foot gastropod, who creates a literal iron armor while also hosting bacteria inside its body that live and thrive while also providing energy to the snail without it ever needing to eat. This would not be a parasite. No harm is done to the snail nor the bacteria. As such, there are a lot of Pokemon that are symbiotic in nature or do feed on each other in unconventional ways, but don't live inside or on humans or other Pokemon, cause harm to each other, or any of those other factors that I've stated. Those will have to be talked about in another video, though I do mention some communalist Pokemon in this one. Let's actually begin, because we're beginning with the classic example of Paras and Parasect. But I'm willing to bet that I know a couple things that you may not regarding it. Red and yellow mushrooms, known as Toxins, grow on this Pokemon's back. The mushrooms can be removed at any time and grow from spores that are doused on this Pokemon's back at birth by the mushroom on its mother's back. Just pluck a little bit off, sprinkle it on your child. Now, Toxins are parasitic in nature, drawing their nutrients from the host Paras's body in order to grow and exerting some command over the Pokemon's actions. For example, Paras drains nutrients from tree roots due to commands from the mushrooms. The mushrooms are also popular among collectors and have medicinal uses, usually involving extending lifespans. Now, Paras specifically can often be found in caves, however, it can also thrive in damp forests, basically places where the mushroom will go best. In the Alola region, the mushrooms on its back do not grow well. This is also thought to be from a lack of moisture or nutrients. So not only does Paras have a parasite, see the pun there, but they also parasite off of trees, which is kind of a gray area thing to say, admittedly, because you can feed on tree roots or trees in general without being a parasite. But because of these Toxins mushrooms, they are effectively forced to stay attached to these trees, drain them completely, and then move on to their next target. And this is said more explicitly with Parasect. Now that the insect has been drained of nutrients, it is now completely under the control of the fully grown Toxins. Removing the mushroom will cause Parasect to stop moving. It can thrive in dark forests with a suitable amount of humidity for growing fungi. Swarms of this Pokemon have been known to infest trees, and said swarm will drain the nutrients of the tree until it dies, definitely parasitic, and will then move on to a new tree. It has been known to fight with Shiinotic over territory. Before we dig into the fact that this Pokemon had the light from its eyes faded to nothing and turned into a bionic mech, the fights it has with Shiinotic is more than just over territory. It's actually over keeping forests alive. Shiinotic is stated to drain prey of energy in some Pokédex entries, but it is shown in the anime to use the energy to bring trees in the forest back to life and restore order. This makes it a strong opposite to Paras and Parasect, as it aims to restore life, while the parasite aims to only fuel themselves and spread their kind. Eat, mate, die, repeat. I need a shirt that says that. Back to Parasect, all it does and all it aims to do is create more of its kind now. In fact, in early generations, the move Spore was its signature move, which is less its signature move and moreover a move that belonged to the mushrooms on its back, I would dare claim. After all, spores are how mushrooms are able to spread, so they can grow mycelium underground and then eventually sprout the mushroom on top, which is their sexual organ. Remember that every time you eat a mushroom, or don't, whatever makes you happier. Though, that leads me to exactly how the mushroom is able to control Parasect, because just like the mycelium that grows underground, there is undoubtedly an entire network of mycelium within Parasect that has effectively replaced its nervous system. This would help explain why if you remove the mushroom just right off, Parasect stops moving, because without the mushroom controlling it, Parasect stops functioning. You could claim it's just attached to the brain, but I personally believe it's more than that. After all, the mycelium replacing all the veins paints a really cool image in my head, if not at least tapping into the spine, which, no, there's no spine. It's a cicada, basically, if it didn't have the mushroom on its body, so there is no actual spine. It's an invertebrate. Now you might be asking yourself, so what does a Paras look like when it doesn't have any mushrooms on it? How does it look when it's born? Boom! We almost had a canon version of this called Para when Generation 2 was coming out, and so many Pokemon were getting baby forms of themselves. We can see, while it doesn't have any mushrooms on its head or back, it is coming out of a mushroom, which, if this was ever brought back, it would be one of the coolest pieces of ecology, in my personal opinion. Paras lovers unite. Imagine a creature that is born from mushrooms. The zombie mother sprinkles spores on its body. It grows up and is slowly taken over, only to then lay eggs inside of other Parasect via those spores and Tochikasho mushrooms in order to repeat the cycle with its own young. The mushrooms don't start by being sprinkled onto Paras, in fact, then they start from inside of Paras, like so many other kinds of infective parasites. And get this, Tochikasu is the Japanese term for cordyceps, which are the same exact type of fungus that is used in The Last of Us, meaning that Pokemon did The Last of Us first, which is a dumb sentence to say out loud, I know, but I had to say it. Though this is because cordyceps actually has the opportunity to do this in real life. With a direct quote from Yale School of Medicine, the spores of the cordyceps seize control of the mind and motor functions of their host, causing erratic behaviors and spurring the insect to seek a higher location, where more sunlight and warmth create prime reproductive conditions for the fungus. Also, it's a really good place for it to get snatched up by a bird, eaten, and then the poop has the fungus in it, and it spreads around more areas, so that way it can get eaten by more creatures, spread around to more creatures, and then have a higher territory, which, insane that that's a real-life adaptation, and this is not a drill then. Paras and Parasect are theoretically entirely possible, especially as they are likely just based on, like I said, little cicada nymphs who have similar feeding habits. Luckily, there have been no known cases of this fungus taking over humans, but that doesn't mean other people haven't had their bodies affected by mushrooms. Like, there was a one guy who injected psychedelic mushroom tea into his vein, and it's hard to say whether things would have started growing or not, but don't worry, he survived. You can kind of imagine how horrific things could have gotten, though. Alternatively, there are plenty of cases where, with the right conditions, fungal spores have made their way into people, especially their lungs, and effectively destroyed them from the inside. I know I personally freak out every single time I maybe leave a container in the fridge for too long and a little bit of fungus, appears on it. Hate to admit that, but it is the truth, and, yeah, I opened that up, and I know none of that's going to affect me, but I fear that it will. Effectively, not every fungus is going to be able to live inside of a human because it has to be able to survive the higher temperature and the environment, so on and so forth, so don't worry. But I do have one last thing to say, and that's fungi are not fun guys, clearly. I'm going to go see myself. Though I will say, before we do continue, I just want to say thank you so much for watching. In short, if you're enjoying this, please do make sure you do subscribe. Comment any thoughts that you have as you're listening to this. Tell me about your favorite Parasite in real life, and then your favorite Parasite Pokemon once you learn about it. In addition, those comments, likes, subscriptions, they all boost the reach of the videos. In addition, if you'd like to go the extra mile and become a member for as little as $3 a month, you not only get behind-the-scenes access, information, a monthly insider, but you also get to have, for the first time, members exclusive videos. Not just early access, members exclusive videos. And the first one that will be coming out is a kind of a retrospective in some capacity, I don't know how to call it, of my entire life with Pokemon. How I got into it, how I fell out of it, how I got into it, how I fell out of it again, and then why the heck I decided that I would do a channel that centers around Pokemon overall. I think you might know that last one, but to have a proper deep dive on it would be very interesting, and supporting the channel monetarily goes a huge mile, as I am the writer, the speaker, the editor, the uploader, the one who makes all the thumbnails, with very rare exception on those thumbnails. But enough of that, and as always, thank you so much for watching, and on with the video. Up next is Shellder, who you wouldn't expect to be a parasite, but by all means fits the description perfectly, because once a Shellder attaches to a Slowpoke on its tail or head, it evolves alongside the peak salamander hippo monster thing as they then evolve. Now, don't let yourself get fooled and believe this is a symbiotic relationship like it likes to tell you, because there are some major issues with this co-evolution that happens. But let's read what is claimed. Shellder, in its greed to suck out more and more sweetness from Slowbro's tail, has metamorphosed into a spiral-shaped shell. Slowbro, in turn, has lost the capability to feel pain due to Shellder's poison. While typically lazy and unintelligent, Slowbro apparently becomes inspired when the Shellder bites down on its tail. While it is capable of unleashing powerful psychic attacks, Slowbro is typically rather peaceful and usually prefers not to fight. Because it can no longer fish using its tail, it instead grudgingly swims to catch its prey and allows the Shellder to feed on its leftover scraps. The Shellder feeds all it wants, and in turn the Slowbro gets technically nothing in return. All the Slowbro really gets is a bite on the tail whenever it isn't doing something it should be, like hunting, searching for water, or needing to sleep. Sure, the Shellder is motivating Slowbro, but last I checked, being bitten hurts, and the only reason it's biting it is so that way Shellder can continue to feed, which may be the only way that Slowbro can feel pain, that bite, and be motivated as the Pokemon claims. You know, digging deep enough into some sort of nerve endings. Again, the only reason Shellder wants the Slowbro to stay active is because the more food it eats, then the more nutrients that flow to its tail, or the sweeter the tail might be. All because Slowbro is then able to stay healthy and active and full, which kind of makes me wonder if it's similar to a gecko in some capacity and it stores fat in its tail as a reserve, which would also make sense as to why the Shellder would choose to bite there, and why Slowpoke tails are stated in recent generations to fall off naturally from time to time and eventually regrow, kind of like a lizard. In addition, removing the ability to feel pain is terrible for survival. There's actually a really fun movie called Novocaine where the main character was born without the ability to feel pain, and he is paralyzingly afraid of accidentally hurting himself for the first act of the movie. Extra precautions like turning everything into a smoothie so he doesn't accidentally bite off his tongue is a good example of how over-conscious he was of it. But ultimately, if you don't feel pain, then you don't realize if something is wrong. If you stepped on a nail, if the lion attacking you is actually a threat since you don't feel anything from what it's doing, so on and so forth. You don't realize you're bleeding, you don't realize you're in danger, you don't realize that your life is potentially about to end because you don't feel any of this. Either way, this Shellder just wants to stick with one Slowbro and continually get its fill of free food. But if it decides to bite on Slowpoke's head, we get what you might consider to be a symbiotic nature in one of its versions. After all, when the King's Crown is placed on the Slowpoke and the Shellder bites that skull, the teeth are kept from digging too far into the brain thanks to the crown, and it results in the evolution of Slowking. This Pokemon gets smarter and smarter the more that chemical reactions occur between the Shellder's poison and the chemicals within Slowking's brain. Almost said Slowpoke's brain, which technically it still is Slowpoke. And outside of damaging the brain in ways that the Slowking doesn't feel and likely will never feel, it's actually not a terrible relationship. Just don't let that Shellder go, or Slowking may just pass away if those bites are deep enough. So, knowing that's a more symbiotic relationship, or at least I will agree to that one, I actually want to focus more on the Galarian forms, who I will claim are parasitic once again. Because on one hand, you have a regular Slowbro arm, and on the other, you have a Shellder in the form of a gun. Can't believe everyone was right. Sword and Shield did have a third version, and its exclusive is a Pokemon with a literal firearm. A Shellder bite set off a chemical reaction with the spices inside of Slowbro's body, causing Slowbro to become a poison-type Pokemon. If this Pokemon squeezes the tongue of the Shellder biting it, the Shellder will launch a toxic liquid from the tip of its shell. Meanwhile, Shellder seems blissful over the taste of Slowbro, even though the toxins seeping from the bite have caused Shellder to faint. It continues to bite down hard on Slowbro's arm, to suck out more poison, and this seems to cause itching, so Slowbro occasionally lashes out. The only reason that Slowbro even has poison in its body to begin with is because this Shellder bit onto it. Again, do not believe the lies that Shellder and Pokemon states about this being a symbiotic relationship. It's like me dousing you in oil and then lighting you on fire because you didn't like feeling so oily. I got rid of the oil, didn't I? I'm a symbiotic relationship, or I have a symbiotic relationship with you, don't I? What I do love about this relationship, though, is that it is entirely brought into existence thanks to the Galarica seed, otherwise directly noted to be the Galarica nut, which is inspired by nutmeg. And when enough of it is eaten, nutmeg, which then often results in horrible poisoning, it can also induce a high. And those drug-induced feelings match out perfectly with what we see in Galarian Slowbro and in the Shellder on its arm. So, canonically speaking, Shellder is the only Pokemon I am currently aware of that gets high at all times within the Pokemon franchise. And of course, we can also then move on and get Galarian Slowking. I should not have to tell people that this one is parasitic, especially as it is directly stated, a combination of toxins and the shock of evolving has increased Shellder's intelligence to the point that Shellder now controls Slowking. It doesn't stop there though, as if this Shellder is removed, it can be placed onto a human's head and take over their mind and body as well, which I think technically that works with regular Slowking's head, or rather the Shellder from there too, but whatever. Something that the anime shows by it controlling Ash. The only thing stopping it is a good smack to remove it. Slowking is also heavily lied about, or at least it has a mixed way of telling its lore, as if it's burying the lead and trying to make sure nobody knows its secrets, because it sometimes sounds like it's helping the Slowpoke body and trying to help weakened Pokemon, but then you get dex entries such as it creates potions by mixing toxins with the food it's eaten. Not even Slowking itself knows what effects the potions will have, and then it will just give it to weakened Pokemon. This is a war criminal, and years later, I still refuse to believe otherwise. There was a moment there where it almost got me. I almost fell to Slowking propaganda, but no, I'm not there. Of course, we can't talk about all of these forms without mentioning its Mega form. While it is all called, Mega Slowbro, we all know deep down inside that this is actually Mega Shellder, which I guess would be the only instance other than Eternal Floette to be able to Mega Evolve without reaching its final evolution. Direct Dex entries state, when bathed in the energy of Mega Evolution, Shellder converts into impregnable armor. There is virtually no change in Slowpoke. All the energy from Mega Evolution poured into the Shellder on its tail, leaving Slowpoke to be swallowed whole. Hold on. That whole claim about the whole, leopard gecko tail and storing fat in the tail of the Slowpoke might actually translate to Slowpoke stores energy in the tail. The energy is stored in the balls. Anywho, jokes aside, in my opinion, you can see this as one of two ways. Either the Shellder is a full-on predator at this point, as Slowpoke is being actively digested by Shellder as it sits in digestive fluids the entire time that it's in its Mega form. Alternatively, though, Shellder is still a parasite that has been able to siphon and feed on Mega energy, which allowed it to reach this state. Either way, it isn't good for Slowpoke, and it has always been the bottom rung of Pokemon's ladder, as it is built to suffer. Again, another great shirt. Slowpoke, built to suffer. But I love it anyway. The Slowpoke line is a strong S-tier Pokemon, and maybe after all this time I need to do a proper Pokemon ranking video. Who knows? Alright, this next one you may or may not see as parasitic depending on how you view it, but Voltorb may actually be a parasite to some capacity. But not modern Voltorb, no, Hisuian Voltorb. It's a pretty strange Pokemon all in all, with nobody canonically knowing what it looks like on the inside, but they not only live in Pokeballs in the modern day, but also lived in the apricorn balls of the past, at least within Hisuian. The hard fact is that just because something like an insect is born inside a fruit or on its skin and eats it, that doesn't make it a parasite by classification. There are plenty of creatures who have their eggs laid in fruits, like wasps who lay their eggs in figs, and just to get rid of the rumor because you thought of it, no, the crunch you get in Fig Newtons are not wasp eggs. From multiple sources, there's effectively a 0% chance of this occurring, as either the eggs hatch and the wasps leave by burrowing out of the fig, or they are ultimately dissolved by the Fig. But back on track, we don't exactly know how the real Voltorb gets inside of Pokeballs, or Apricorn Balls, or Apricorns as they appear in the wild still. All we know is that the Pokemon we see is likely not the real thing, which would also explain why they are so willing to self-destruct on a whim. They aren't dying when they do it, they are likely freeing themselves, or at the very least, spreading whatever organism they have inside of them out into the world. After all, I believe it is stated that there are seeds that are known to be inside of Hisuian Voltorb. And if the organism lives its life by attaching and leeching off of things like the trees themselves of the apricorns, then it could be a parasite. It all really just depends on if it is taking nutrients from another living thing, which fruit, again, is not classified as by all technical standards. And by these standards, as much as I wanted to include it as part of this list, that would then mean that Applin would not be a parasite either, as it isn't actively keeping the fruit alive, but rather is just preserving it. Another strange case of technicality is when we look at Seedot. It attaches itself to a tree branch using the top of its head and sucks moisture and nutrients from the tree while hanging off the branch. The more water it drinks, the glossier this Pokemon's body becomes. The only way that they then fall from this tree is by either another Pokemon bothering it, or if it absorbs too much water and falls from the branch, basically once it gets its fill. The main reason they do this is because they can attract the attention of the birds to then see their glossy selves get picked up and then dropped off into new areas where there are less Seedot, effectively letting them spread their species all over the place. And because Seedot doesn't have a preference and seemingly just attaches to any tree that it can or wants to, and drains it of moisture and nutrients while also doing nothing for the tree in return, then it is definitely seeming more like a parasite in at least this stage of its life, as it lives on the tree until it is full of what it needs, which could potentially harm said tree. You know, honestly, that makes Seedot seem like a tick, but for trees. And in all reality, there are plenty of plants that are parasitic in nature, so this isn't a big shocker. A number of these plants are also unable to photosynthesize. They manage this parasitic nature, or their lifestyle, through what is called, typically, a hostorium. Long story short, the plant stabs itself into another plant as it attaches itself through something such as vines or roots, and with the newly open access, it inserts itself and steals away everything that it needs. The one I'm most familiar with that does this is the Dotter plant, which does live in Wisconsin, and I'm pretty sure I came across them once before in college. Either way, it seems clear to me that this is how Seedot functions until it can eventually meet its needs to evolve into Nuzleaf. Cacnea is not the cactus, which already throws a lot of questions into the mix. And in fact, by pretending to be a cactus, it is able to blend in with the desert landscape. At first, all of its information makes it sound like, it actually is one. It is able to live in deserts for 30 days without any water, due to its body being able to store moisture. The beauty and fragrance of its yellow flower on its head depends on the harshness of its environment. This flower releases a strong aroma to attract prey, and when prey approaches, it shoots sharp thorns to bring said prey down. But then we get to take the next step and evolve it into Cacturn. We get one line from this evolution that changes everything for this Pokemon. After spending thousands of years in harsh deserts, its blood transformed into the same substances as sand. Of course, this isn't the be-all, end-all, and you could interpret otherwise. Maybe it's not a parasite, but why would a creature that is stated to be a plant have blood in the first place? In fact, this is one of the few times where a Pokemon's blood is mentioned. Their own blood, not eating another creature's blood. And not sap, not honey, or anything else you would normally expect to get from a plant. Blood right off the bat. Sure, there are plenty of other Pokemon out there that are grass types who also definitely have blood, like Bulbasaur and Rowlet, but it's pretty clear that they have blood in their bodies, while others like Maractus and Oddish do not. To me, it feels pretty clear which ones have blood and which ones are just plants up until we throw in Cacnea, who gives us this curveball. There's no telling what's actually inside of Cacnea or Cacturn. All we know is that there is something that made its way inside and eventually adapted for some reason. That for some strange reason, blood wasn't very useful anymore. And there's one main reason why I think this actually happened, and it's just because of water content. deserts are dry. I don't need to tell you that, I hope. But when you depend on water, you either travel far, being able to store it in your body, or use deep roots to get water from deep underground. Or you just lower your overall need for water. And Cacnea spent long enough wandering around, not digging its roots into the ground, trying to store what little water it could, and eventually realizing that it needs to change, that it has instead then chosen to get the water it needs from hunting, as its own blood was completely replaced. Which makes it not too different from other predators then. Cacnea and Cacturn get all their essential liquids and nutrients from the blood of their prey. Either that, or they really just don't need any water whatsoever, but I doubt that, considering they have to keep the outer layer of their cactus, whether it is actually them or not, alive somehow. They have to water themselves, which I suppose you could argue makes it a potential symbiotic relationship if the cactus actually benefits and still grows seeds to spread its species. But again, I'll let you decide how you feel about this one. We're going to give you a sneak peek of a legendary here, technically a mythical I guess, as Deoxys is here early, separate from the rest of our special Pokemon, and Deoxys by definition was once a virus, with its Pokedex strictly stating the DNA of a space virus underwent a sudden mutation upon exposure to a laser beam and resulted in Deoxys. What makes this strange though is that we assume Deoxys doesn't need a host now. But what we also don't know is what would have been its host. After all, it is strictly and consistently called a virus. That really leaves us with a couple of different questions then. The question that I have is just what was Deoxys' original host, as I stated, and there are a couple of different answers people have potentially come up with across YouTube or theorists all over. Some say that it would be Staryu. After all, both have 5 points to their body, and especially now we can see that Mega Starmie is far more human-like. This would make it a great natural host, as Starmie is already aiming to be more human-like in general. Between a cult and legend ZA, relaying info back to its own kind and the stars, and just overall being a psychic type, which is associated with strong intelligence, it's almost perfect. We can also even add in that they both have a similar core where their brain actually is. As long as these cores aren't destroyed, then both of these Pokemon can live on without a singular problem. Let some fish nibble at their arms, get it blown off by Rayquaza, not a big deal. Now, there are plenty of theories stating that Deoxys is Staryu, or even that Deoxys may have been a meteor. And while there's lots and tons of fun evidence for both of these, I think it's much easier to simply say that Deoxys would have likely had an opportunity to become a virus of any other space-inhabiting Pokemon, with Staryu or Starmie being a great primary host. And that becomes a lot easier when we realize that it still has an ability that a normal virus would have, and that's replication. Though it doesn't need, or we assume it doesn't need to have a host anymore. But it still leaves me wondering where it came from. The building blocks of DNA being found enclosed perfectly within asteroids is something that has occurred within the real world, but nothing like Deoxys to my understanding. And if it were to ever happen, then we have to question where in the universe, not just space, is the home of this virus. Where did it adapt first? And maybe even question how did this home world get broken apart to then send away these space rocks that enclosed this virus. And as a last note, this makes me realize that the virus form of Deoxys is likely anaerobic, meaning it can't survive in oxygen-filled environments, explaining even further why when they do arrive on Earth, they seem to want to leave pretty quickly. Whoever their typical host is, it is one that is not of our planet and might primarily reside within space itself, or a planet without typical or normal or a lot of oxygen. I would then say that Rayquaza could be a potential host, and it would explain why they have such beef between each other, but there's no real evidence of this, and it's just a really fun thing to consider. So, just making Deoxys a little bit more horrifying overall for you today. Shockingly, we move on to Dwebble, who is a cute little hermit crab that makes its home inside of rocks. It uses a corrosive spray to break down the rock, and then it can core out a little home for itself inside of it. Doesn't seem like that big of a deal until we think about all the different rock-type Pokemon that are out there. 2 Pokemon that are directly noted to be attacked by Dwebble are Roggenrola and Roly-Poly. The Pokédex names Dwebble as a natural enemy of them, meaning that Dwebble doesn't care if it's a living rock or not. It's a rock, and Dwebble's gonna make a home for itself within it. Kind of a big deal having your body cored out by another living being to then be used as a home for the rest of its life. And that's assuming that they pass away after Dwebble makes their homes inside of these rock Pokemon, because I don't really know, their organs or how any of that works. I don't know if you're able to figure it out, but other than having faces and tongues from time to time, I don't know where any of a lot of different rock Pokemon's organs are, or if they have proper organs, meaning that they could still be alive after a Dwebble cores into their body. You'd expect not, but it's possible. Either way, they're creatures made of rock and stone. Sorry, I should say rock and stone. And Dwebble is coring them out to make a home for themselves. They may not be eating them, but it made me wonder if there are any other creatures in the real world that does this. And there's one kind of gross example that does exist in our world. Pearlfish are slender, eel-shaped fish that have developed a unique symbiotic relationship with sea cucumbers. They often take refuge inside the anus of sea cucumbers, which provides them with a safe haven from predators. And of course, sea cucumbers breathe through their anus. Fun stuff. Commensalism versus parasitism. While the relationship is generally considered commensal, meaning that the pearlfish benefit without harming the sea cucumber, some species of pearlfish can act parasitically. They may feed on the gonads and other internal organs of their host, which can cause harm, of course. Upwards of 15 of them have been noted to live inside of a sea cucumber. And yeah, I think I'm good. I wouldn't want to feel any of that, something eating you from the inside, and I just honestly hope that Dwebble are actively killing these rock Pokemon before making their home inside of them. I'm just, I'm ready to move on, and I think you are too. This one is a bit different, as just like with Parasect being the victim, so is Galarian Yamask. In fact, it is stated that a slab with cursed engravings took possession of a Yamask. This slab is said to absorb Yamask's dark power, and some say it was drawn to this Pokemon due to it being a vengeful spirit. Now, this stone is based on Viking runestones, and I once again love to show off that I've been very, very blessed by an individual in my audience known as Telumio, who actively went out and found runestones where they live and shared them with me directly. These things are effectively gravestones with deep curses put on them to ward them from people who would dare disrespect them. You touch them, disrespect, destroy, then you in turn, by doing any of those things, will become cursed to no end for disturbing the rest of the dead. By these standards, we might even be able to say that the original spirit of Yamask may have been one of these people to disrespect the runestone, which would also explain potentially why it is seen as a vengeful spirit. In fact, Yamask may have even been a wandering spirit who fought against whoever created these stones and then disrespected them in the afterlife, or it's just some numbskull who decided to kick it, and then of course they're immediately cursed. All theories aside, it's very clear that this stone is simply continuing to siphon energy from Yamask until eventually it can be reborn in the form of Runerigus, a Pokemon that gets very terrifying when we look at the implications of its transformation, a tomb that holds the body during an effective purgatory until it is reborn. The 49 points of damage being the perfect catalytic event to allow the runestone to take over the body of Yamask and grow into a completely new species. A parasite that has now become its own entity in its own right, and one that will fill your head with horrible visions of another life if you were to ever touch its runic body. Karrablast is another technical parasite because the only way that it's able to evolve is by stealing the shell of Shelmet, evicting the little snail and turning it into a slug. I know the armor isn't a living part of Shelmet's body, technically, but it's definitely still a part of Shelmet and is incredibly vital for its survival. In fact, it's so vital that now that it has been removed from this shell, it has to wrap itself up in ribbon-like membranes to keep its body moist, or else it would dry up and pass away. And of course, I'm talking about its evolution, Axelgore, who is very unhappy about this situation overall, and I would be too if I were it. I was happily eating some delicious detritus, nomming on some leaves probably, and some snail eater beetle decided he didn't want to kill me He just wanted to take my home for itself, as if it didn't already have an exoskeleton to protect it, keep it nice and moist, and away from harm sometimes. And to top it all off, of course it then evolves into some cool armored beetle that every other trainer then wants for themselves. So more of my own species are just going to get evicted from their homes because some people think Axogor looks cool and others think Escavalier looks cool, encouraging this transformation and for the stealing of my shell overall. And all of this is canonical, by the way. It's just, plainly put in a weird, funny way, I hope. It's a bit wild to consider, honestly, and I can't think of a good parasitic tie-in for this one that doesn't go back to the sea cucumber, so take the terrifying tongue louse instead, which luckily, very luckily, only affects fish, and it flat out replaces their tongue after, I believe, eating it. Thank God for making this creature. I love it. More of a communalist, we have Joltik, who I wanted to at least include in this little list. It's a Pokemon that relies on electricity to move, to act, to do anything. Unlike some other electric Pokemon, Joltik doesn't actually consume electricity for its stomach, for its food, but still needs it to be able to move around. If ever Joltik runs out of electricity, it will become completely immobile, and in a world full of predators, you can imagine just how bad of a situation that is. Luckily, Joltik is known to be very close with their evolution, Galvantula, who can then help with Joltik's needs. Alternatively, though, Joltik will attach itself to other electric Pokemon in order to take electricity from them. This works incredibly well on Pokemon such as Yamper, who continually generate electricity on their body rather than fully storing it within an electric organ. This gives Joltik the perfect opportunity to attach to Yamper's heart-shaped booty and fill its need for electricity, because that's where a lot of the static produces. They even have a plush for this in more communist type relationship that they have, and it's very adorable. Honestly, can't imagine a situation in which this would actually be considered more parasitic in nature, though if you really want to push it, you could say that maybe Joltik could attach to the wrong Pokemon and draw out too much electricity, causing them to be unable to defend themselves. And the more I think about it, I realize that Joltik likely move in groups, could attach themselves as a swarm to a Pokemon, draw out all of their electricity, and then a Galvantula could come in to strike the final blow to feed everybody. This teaches the Joltik how to hunt in a safe environment, while also reinforcing their bonds within their families. It might even explain why Galvantula is stated to only hunt small birds, even though it is a massive spider, even though there's only one electric type bird out there that's commonly occurring, and that's in Paldea, but whatever, ignore that. I nearly guarantee it is hunting, Galvantula that is, more than just small birds, but we may have only observed it hunting those small birds as it's actually feeding its young. Meanwhile, it's able to hunt the rest of its prey in the shadow of night or within coverage in some capacity. Another short and technical one is Glimmet, who may be considered a communalist rather than a parasite in regard to Terapagos' energy. And even then, we have to question if this is more akin to Terapagos being the tree and the crystals for terrestrialization being its fruit. To better explain, Terapagos is the source for the complete terrestrialization process within Paldea, though we can't say the same for places like Kitakami and wherever Ogerpon got her masks from. Despite this, at least within Paldea, we come to the understanding that all Terra crystals, the terrestrial phenomenon, everything there is from Terapagos and has been generated by this little turtle for thousands upon thousands of years. Eventually, at some unknown point in time, Glimmet came into existence directly because of this phenomenon. This is shown indirectly through seeing it in Paldea's Area 0 and Kitakami's Crystal Pool. It does have a special return in Legends ZA, but we'll save that for a different video. I will say it's important to at least know that Glimmet does not have a natural population within Kalos, and it is a result of Hyperspace Lumios that it does appear within Legends ZA. Nevertheless, it has a strong attachment to these Terra crystals, taking a flowering form from them in its own right, as it continues to spread its own crystallized poison while also consuming nutrients from cave walls. Kind of makes me think of like the gingerbread man living in a gingerbread house. Is the house made of his flesh, or is he made of his house? Life is horror. Either way, this is a strange situation, and you might still consider that Glimmet is nothing more than the flower before the fruit, for another theory, that they will form on the crystals who serve as the tree, something that we do see in Area 0, and something that I believe that Boltoy, from a previous video that I covered his articles in, does claim in some capacity. The Glimmet then eventually grow to become full flowers in their Glimmora form, and finally continue to spread crystals everywhere else. So maybe not even a communalist, but rather just another organ of this strange new life born from the energy of Terapagos. We have yet another parasitic mushroom in the form of Toedscruel and Toedscruel. As a reminder, just because a mushroom is growing on or around a tree though, or even the mycelium is connected to roots underground, it does not mean that they are parasitic in nature. In fact, what is lovingly named the Wood Wide Web is something that has been strongly observed to be essential to life on this planet, though we have only seen a fraction of what lies underneath regarding it, especially as there are miles upon miles of mycelium growing deep underground that connects vast woods across great spaces to each other. They provide each other with otherwise hard to get nutrients and water, transferring and assisting each other when there is excess in one area and a need in another. It's a beautiful thing to consider just how connected it all is within our world, but there are moments in which not only the connected roots of these trees decide to act purely on self-centered survival, but also some mycelium that may act in this way as well, causing an imbalance, causing harm, killing other trees, killing the mycelium, so on and so forth, which leads us to our Paldean mushroom Pokemon. Toedscruel itself seems to be more about reaching farther distances, places where it would find less competition as it runs at 30 miles per hour. Meanwhile, Toedscruel is the one to settle down, have a family of 4, go work in finances in a bank, all the normal things. They are noted to not like intruders, but also suck out the nutrients of their prey while living deeply secluded in the forest. So this gets pretty complicated and this could go either way, but considering they are woodier mushrooms, definitely have a more predatory nature to them, and those mycelium tentacles have to attach somewhere when there's no traditional prey, I'm willing to believe that they are parasites. If not, then they are just straight out predators. So my thought is, though, that they'll be stealing their nutrients from dense forests where they can take as they please, grow into large swarms of their own kind, and eventually, when there are too many of them, then their younger versions, being the Toedscruel, would then be able to run across the lands of Paldea and find the next place to settle down and grow into a full colony. They aren't going to care how much they're taking, they're building their web, and eventually they'll be all over the continent, if not the world, if they can manage it somehow. I will say though that it is weird that Toedscruel hops until I start realizing that it serves 2 purposes. It could be an ambush predator, as it jumps up into the trees, and then also, by hopping great distances, it is able to cross divides between land and reach new areas that other Pokemon, plants, or mushrooms are unable to reach, making it a great adaptation to colonize areas that have not been settled in by this creature. It gets less competition, it grows better, it has a better source of food, or it can even attack prey that aren't used to it, potentially making it a future invasive species. A really useful tool overall in the older age, where land masses may have also been splitting further and further apart over time. We now get to move on to the rest of the very special Pokemon of this list. Deoxys was just a taste of what was to come, as Necrozma is a parasite, but only in 2 specific forms, its Dawn and Dusk forms with Solgaleo and Lunala. To explain all of this better, we have to start with the understanding of what Necrozma is, and it is simply a creature who has fallen from its place of power. No matter the version we look at throughout media, it is a creature that was damaged in some way, and it lost what we call its Ultra form. In addition, while it is attempting to reach this Ultra form, it aims to absorb light from wherever it can, be it the light of Alola, light emitted from other creatures, or even by it absorbing Z-power back into its body. The Z crystals and Z energy that is found in and all around Alola is purely thanks to Ultra Necrozma. It's shed light, permeating throughout the many dimensions, and having an adverse number of effects on the world around them. And yes, one of these days I will have a video on how all the Ultra Beasts were created, alongside how Ultra Necrozma changed their world, but that's for a different day. For now, We move forward with knowing that once Ultra Necrozma fell into what is effectively this corrupted state where it constantly feels an incredible amount of pain, it is desperate to regain its power and to restore itself. Then comes two Pokemon that attracts its attention, a modicum of hope of returning back to its original form and no longer being in this pain as it sees Solgaleo and Lunala. It has been revealed through an interview with Kazumasa Iwao, game designer and a director at Game Freak, that he stated that the light produced by this Pokemon actually exceeds its requirements, inducing a berserk state. Specifically quoted, as a result, and even though it really only needed a small amount of energy, Necrozma comes to gain a huge amount of energy beyond what Necrozma itself anticipated when it captures Solgaleo or Lunala, and because of excessive amounts of energy, Necrozma goes berserk. To clarify, Necrozma is attaching to Solgaleo or Lunala in an attempt to try and restore itself, as for some unknown reason, they are able to produce an infinite amount of light from their bodies. This light, of course, looks like a buffet for Necrozma, so how could it ever resist such a temptation? More than this, though, instead of it devouring these legendary Pokemon, Necrozma instead decides it's best fit to instead break its body apart and attach itself to them, creating an armor on their bodies of its own self, disjointed and cursed, literally allowing it to not just live on top of them or as a part of them, but it also allows Necrozma to keep them alive, control them, and continually absorb the infinite light that is emitted from their bodies. This is about as parasitic as it could possibly get, as Necrozma will never aim to destroy these legendary Pokemon, and to my knowledge, they won't ever die. It will just keep them alive as its prey until it is absorbed enough to return to its Ultra state, though this isn't how it works, and instead it backfires. Now, in its Dawn and Dusk forms, it has flipped the balance completely from one side of the spectrum to the other, from an empty husk to an overfilled glass preparing to burst, and so it rampages to get rid of this constant flux of energy. What I love about this is that it's no different from Pokemon such as those undergoing Rogue Mega Evolution. There's simply so much energy poured inside of them that they have to let it out for their own safety. The result is that they grow larger and unleash powerful moves in excess in their own rampage. And considering this is painful to them, maybe it's also painful to Necrozma in these Dawn and Dusk forms. Not only this, but it seems like there's a chance that Necrozma isn't meant to completely parasite on these Pokemon, and that it should only be consuming from them only when necessary. Unfortunately, when you're in an incredible amount of constant pain, you do anything you can to stop it without thinking of what the potential consequences there might be. Just poor Necrozma. It's just looking to restore its Ultra form, and so being a parasite in a cage all in one is the method that it chose, the one that made the most sense for it at the time, and it only hurt it further. For our semi-finale, we have for the last time another case of communalism that I guarantee you would have never expected to see on this list, and it's Marshadow. There's not a lot known about Marshadow other than some very basic connections that are driven further through scrapped lore or leaked files, which are really cool, but there is one thing about Marshadow that we do know for sure, and that would be that it enters the shadows of others, and it is through this that they are able to perfectly absorb their abilities. More directly stated, it sinks into the shadows of people and Pokemon, where it can understand their feelings and copy their abilities. This is more than just a student learning from or copying a master. This is more than looking at art and picking up nuances to advance our own techniques. This is full-on absorption of power and abilities without taking it from the host. How Marshadow does this isn't really explained, but we do know that it doesn't harm the person or Pokemon that it's doing this to. Once again, making it more of a communal relationship than a parasitic relationship. Further than this, Marshadow is able to not just perfectly mimic abilities and power in lore, but it is able to take it all multiple steps further as it combines the knowledge it has gained from all the different sources and pushes the ability beyond what the original owner could do. Anything you can do, Marshadow can do better, and that's pretty much it. Our last Pokemon that is arguably one of the most powerful true parasites of all is Nihilego, or Nihilego, whatever the heck you want to, however the heck you want to pronounce it. And to make things very clear, it is understood that Ultra Beasts are Pokemon. They are creatures that do reign from other universes alongside our own, but they still exist in the Pokédex, are known to be caught in a Pokeball, not just Beast Balls, even if the chances are low, and ultimately they can have trainers as shown through the Carton Envoys. They are effectively the Pokemon Rangers of the Ultra Beasts. Back on track though with Nihilego, they specifically live in another world named Ultra Deep Sea, occasionally being brought to Alola through Ultra Wormholes. Although its exact levels of intelligence are unknown, it is believed to act upon a self-preservation instinct, and displays a lack of emotion or even will, though there are instances in which they have been shown to act on more than just this, such as what we see with the one that pretends to be Lily as it makes a family with Mon, or rather tries to just live a life with Mon. What's really weird about Nihilego living in their universe is that we have to assume there's another form of prey for them to feed on. They don't feed on each other, and yet we don't see any other species within their world whatsoever. At least, not that we are shown. There are no hosts for it in that place. This can also be said for a number of other Ultra Beasts, especially those that feast on other Pokemon or creatures in general, like Buzzwole. Now, when Nihilego does latch onto a host's head, it does not manipulate its actions directly in this basic form. Instead, it awakens the host's own capabilities and boosts them to an extreme extent in order to protect itself. It injects the host with a sort of neurotoxin to achieve this effect. This neurotoxin of Nihilego's is incredibly stimulating and inspires feelings of extreme excitement and a lack of inhibition in its host. Anything or anyone that Nihilego latches onto will have its native skills forcibly activated to their fullest extent and will then act as it naturally desires to, meaning that the Pokemon acts as it wants, not caring about what others think or what damage could be done. The Pokemon Adventures manga also elaborates on its neurotoxin, explaining that its venom turns their negative emotions into happiness and pleasure. It's also said that Nihilego mostly feeds on those who feel intense worry or anxiety. It can take everything then a step further, as it is capable of physically merging with its host, such as with Lusamine. In turn, this not only changes the appearance of Nihilego, but also changes the appearance of the one that it merged with. This is different from other key art that we see regarding this Ultra Beast, as it doesn't need to complete a full merge in order to feed on their host, but this is a very special occasion, likely because it particularly loved feeding on Lusamine's mental pain. It actually loved merging with Lusamine so much that it actively prevented her from separating from it, continuing to use her as a food source and battery for her own power. It used the neurotoxins to feed into her desires, release her inhibitions, create more anxiety, more worry, more pain, more mental strain, and overall create a buffet for itself at the cost of Lusamine's life, all while making her feel better and better and better, turning that negative energy into something positive, no matter how damaging it actually was. The toxins produced by Nihilego may remain in the host's body even after it has left their body. This can leave the former host to remain ill for unspecified amounts of time, and treatment may be necessary. It leaving a host's body can also cause unconsciousness, as is with the case with Lusamine. However, to be clear, it is unknown directly whether or not this is truly because of Nihilego's toxins, the stress infusion, or the overwhelming amount of Z-power within her body, which, to be honest, is probably a mix of everything. So, long story short, Lusamine was the perfect host for Nihilego. She lost her husband and was desperate to get him back by any means necessary. Fortunately, when people usually say, by any means necessary, it isn't literal. But in the case of Lusamine, who has Nihilego feeding on her negative emotions and compounding them with the toxin to release inhibitions and generate more negative emotions that it feeds on, makes her feel better, makes her feel good for making the decisions that she's making, no matter how horrible it is, then Lusamine does mean by any means necessary, literally. And of course, she feels amazing the entire time that this is happening, and since our monkey brains enjoy happy serotonin and other happy chemicals, it only encouraged her to continue making awful decisions as more negative emotions are naturally created and they are transformed by Nihilego as they assumedly eat them and then implant these positive feelings. What makes Nihilego terrifying isn't that it merged with a mother who loves frogs, but that it has the capacity to merge with humans, Pokemon, maybe even legendary and mythical Pokemon. Imagine the sheer power of a Pokemon like Arceus having Nihilego attached to it, and no longer caring, no longer willing to hold back. The wrath of a literal god not being wrath, but rather joy of destruction, effectively given the desire to destroy and cause mayhem. And you could say the same for many other Pokemon like Buzzwole, all because Nihilego is activating that hidden, unused potential within their host, empowering them while feasting as it needs to. Actually, you know what this reminds me of? It reminds me of when people, I don't remember what it's called off the top of my head, but like when someone gets trapped under a car and you see someone walk up or run up and they lift the car up to save like a child or a person or whatever else, right? And it's like a feat of extreme strength, and hysterical strength is what it's called. And with hysterical strength, it's just the adrenaline and your body kicking in at maximum overdrive, and you lift these things, you push beyond what you thought were your limits, and your body suffers afterwards. It uses up all of its power, all of its energy, everything that it could do in order to meet the crisis face on. And I kind of imagine that Nihilego is effectively doing that, now that I think about it, that maybe Nihilego is causing hysterical strength or hysterical ability, whatever you want to call it, within an individual, but instead of it being a momentary situation, it is a constant hysterical strength. And that is an incredibly exhausting thing. In fact, a lot of people end up hurting themselves during their moments of hysterical strength. Nevertheless, this effectively turns Nihilego into the worst and most terrifying parasite Pokemon, bar none. But what are your thoughts? Any differing opinions on these parasites, or are there any that you think that I missed, that they're not just predator-prey species, but actual proper parasites? Let me know in the comments. If you enjoyed, make sure you do subscribe for more, as I release content on a weekly basis, maybe even faster, and they're all deep dives into questions most others won't ask. In addition, if you would like to go the extra mile, become a member for as little as $3 a month and get access to behind-the-scenes info, early access to videos, and even those member-exclusive videos that I want to have come out bi-weekly, if not more often, which members of the channel, you guys also get to help me choose what those videos are going to be on. But with that then, thank you to all the members of the channel, and as always, thank you so much for watching. Don't do anything I wouldn't do. Don't do anything I would do. Please be nice to each other. I love you, and I'll see you next time.